So the First Amendment guarantees freedom of religion. The Constitution says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This is not two separate clauses. People read this as two separate clauses, that there is one clause that says that we shouldn't establish religion, and then there's a second clause that says we should not prohibit the free exercise of religion. It's one clause. What the Constitution means is we should not establish a national religion so that we are not cramming down anything on your religion. The idea of religious freedom is inherent in the idea of being an individual, right? There's an individual negative right. I have a right to worship. Okay? But the left maintains that even if you're bothering no one, their positive rights regime demands that your negative rights be made secondary. So a few examples. You're a religious baker, and you believe that you ought to be able to conduct your business as you see fit. This is your negative right. It's your business. It's nobody else's business. They didn't put the time in. They didn't put the money in. You get to deal with who you want to. That's a basic freedom. It's an associative freedom, not just a religious freedom. As we'll see, the Constitution also says you get to associate with who you want. The government doesn't get to force association upon you. The left says, no, we will force you to violate your religion because we believe that you have a right to walk into anybody's shop and order anything you want, and it is their job to provide it to you. So if you walk into a religious Christian shop and you want a cake for your same-sex wedding, well, we will force you at point of gun, at point of bayonet. We'll fine you. We'll destroy your life if you don't do that. This is a violation of fundamental freedoms. Now, for those of you in the room who are saying, well, why don't you just bake the cake? Okay, fine, you open a bakery and you bake the cake. It's not up to you to decide what anybody else does with their shop. It's not up to you to decide what anybody else does with their school. If you believe that you get to tell somebody what they do with their business on this level, then this makes you the tyrant in this situation. Just because you disagree with someone doesn't mean you have the right to oppress them. Okay, another example with regard to freedom of religion. Obamacare required originally that all health care plans cover abortion care. And this meant that the federal government tried to tell a nunnery, the Little Sisters of the Poor, that they had to cover at least minor abortion care. The basic idea was that they had to fill out a form saying they didn't cover abortion care, which would then trigger a government provision of abortion care. The Little Sisters of the Poor, as you might tell from their name, it's a bunch of nuns. Nuns are not famous for their advocacy for the killing of the unborn. And yet Obamacare, nonetheless, was attempting to force these nuns into a system of guaranteeing abortion care for people. This is a violation of individual rights of nuns, and if they can come for a religion that is not yours, they can certainly come for a religion that is yours. This is true with regard to mandates on the behavior of those you hire or fire. Your religious school. And your religious school teaches that there are two sexes, not 9, not 13, not attack helicopters, 2. Okay? And as the head of a religious school, you say, look, we teach kindergartners, we teach kids who are 5, and we really don't want Miss Sally to come in tomorrow and be Mr. Jim. Right? That's not something that we're willing to allow our 5-year-olds to be exposed to, because it turns out that children are easily confused. And it is kind of confusing if a man or a woman who is dressed as a man walks in the next day and then says that they ought to be treated as a man. This might confuse a small child. I mean, frankly, it confuses most adults. According to the government, this is something the government should force on you. According to the left, the government should force this on you. They should force free institutions, religious or non-religious, into determining how they should hire and fire. Okay, it's a violation of individual freedoms. Bottom line, under the Constitution, my values are none of your business. I get to swing my fist in any direction so long as it doesn't hit you in the face. Another key freedom espoused in the Constitution, freedom of speech and of the press. The easiest way to restrict freedom of speech on campus is by claiming that some sort of hate speech has been used, right? I am a purveyor of hate speech. This is what I've been told by the protesters outside. Or they say that I'm somehow microaggressing somebody, which isn't, I mean, that term in and of itself is so stupid, microaggression. It's such an idiotic term. The idea is that I've performed some sort of minor aggression on you by speaking, and therefore you get to act with macroaggression against me. For speaking, why don't you just say that you don't like what I'm saying and you're a little offended, and then I'll say I don't care, and then we can go about our daily business. Instead, it's how I've been microaggressed. This is hate speech. Let's be clear. There is no constitutional category called hate speech. The reason there is no constitutional category called hate speech is because that which many of us call reasonable speech, the left says is hate speech. They say that a lot of stuff they disagree with is just hate speech. Like, look, let's be real about this. I think that there is certain speech that is fairly objectively hateful. People who use the N-word, right? I think that's objectively hateful. Does that mean it gets to be banned? Even there, I say no, because the fact is that I don't want the government deciding what speech can and cannot be said. And the constitutional founders agreed with this. They also did not want the government deciding what can and cannot be said, even stuff that I find absolutely vile. Which is why it's weird to me, a lot of protesters outside want to shut down a speech like this. They want to come in and disrupt. I've never wanted to shut down the protesters. I don't care about it. First of all, it's great press for me. Go for it, guys. Okay, another freedom that is under assault, the freedom of assembly. Okay, you have the right to hang out with people you want to hang out with. It's not the government's responsibility to tell you with whom you choose to assemble, with whom you choose to be politically active, or with whom you choose to do business. The left wants to restrict who goes where based on race. They have affirmative action programs that they want to establish at universities because they say that diversity is good for you inherently. Listen, I have no problem with racial diversity, but if it means that we are going to artificially create racial diversity at the expense of people who are better qualified, then that is something that we call racism. You don't get to do that. And they want to restrict how you do business, as I explained before. Okay, one of the key freedoms that it talks about in the Bill of Rights is the right to bear arms. Obviously, the left does not see it this way. The goal of the right to bear arms, this is the most fundamental of all rights, because the fundamental individual right is your right to protect yourself. Your right to protect yourself from violations of your rights, from tyranny. It is the fundamental right. There is no First Amendment without a Second Amendment. Okay, the left seeks to undermine the Second Amendment through rhetorical trickery by suggesting that you have to be a member of a well-trained militia in order to own a gun, which is just a blatant historical misreading. Basically, everybody was a member of a militia back when the Bill of Rights was ratified in 1791. And then they suggest also that you don't need any sort of gun to protect yourself, either in safety terms, which is a weird, I mean, you guys are at USC. Have you walked like 3 blocks from USC? Okay. Or by suggesting that the government is the people, that the government is just, all that the government is just the people. So why would you need a gun to protect yourself against the government? Well, as the history of the world shows, sometimes the government is made up of pretty awful people. There's a reason that some of the first gun control restrictions in the United States were passed specifically by Jim Crow governments in the South attempting to prevent black people from owning firearms. That's because tyrannical governments are very fond of a people that is not armed. The idea of the government, I frankly can't understand the left's position on this. At the same time they are arguing that Donald Trump is an incipient Hitler, they're saying, please, Mr. Trump, take all our guns. All right? That's weird. The Constitution protects your right against unreasonable search and seizure. The basic principle here is that the government can't tell you what to do with your home. Now, this has historically been an area where both the right and the left have violated freedoms, because a lot of people want to tell you what to do in your home, or they want to violate your rights. I think the worst case that I've seen recently was this case of a black fellow named Botham Jean in Texas. If you didn't follow this case, it's an awful, awful case. There's a white police officer who I believe was off duty, and she broke into, she thought that she was walking into her own apartment. She walked into Botham Jean's apartment, this I think he was an insurance salesman, this African-American insurance salesman. She walked into his apartment. She thought that he was a criminal in her apartment, and she shot him to death. Okay, and then that's bad enough. Then the police department released the news that Botham Jean had been growing pot in his apartment, as though this justified the wrongful shooting of Botham Jean. That's absurd. The Constitution is supposed to protect against that sort of thing. And when it comes to the stuff that you're doing in your own apartment, so long as it's not affecting anybody else, that's nobody else's business. And this applies whether we are talking about matters sexual, which is what I know everybody on the left wants to talk about. It also matters with regard to how I raise my kid. Again, none of your business. You don't get to decide how I raise my kid, and I promise you, I really don't want to know what you're doing behind that bedroom door. Okay. Finally, we reach the hot button section of the speech, due process of law. So, the British government violated the rights of the colonists without due process of law. They would sort of trump up charges, they wouldn't have proper court procedures, and so the colonists, when they decided to enshrine due process of law in the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution, they decided this was a very, very key thing. Due process is not based on your identity group. Due process is based on you as an individual. You as an individual cannot have your rights removed from you without a due process of law, without a process that is fair and impartial and allows you to confront your accuser. This is due process of law. Other individual rights. The right to life, obviously, is protected by the Constitution of the United States. Under the Fifth Amendment, the right to life is inherent in due process. You cannot be removed of your life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Obviously, the left doesn't care about unborn babies, so we can kill them. But it turns out that the founders probably would have been a little bit upset with the idea of 1 million unborn babies being killed in the womb so that you can feel like you are exercising your bodily liberty. You know, the abortion argument is always such a weird one to me. It's like, oh, it's to get out of my body. Believe me, I have no interest. Get out of my body. Get your hands off my. No, why don't? It's such an odd argument. Like, I've never talked about your esophagus, right? And by the way, the uterus is not the portion of the body that men find the most attractive, just FYI. So when women are like, oh, get your hands off my uterus. When's the last time even a bad dude went for the uterus? Like, the reason that it turns out that lots of people are interested in your uterus is because there's something inside it, another human. And that human begins its life the minute that it is conceived. And make no mistake, this particular collective positive right, the right to kill an unborn human being out of convenience, that is the real reason the left hates Brett Kavanaugh. It has nothing to do with any of this other stuff. It has to do with they think that Brett Kavanaugh is the 5th vote to overturn Roe v. Wade, and they will stop at nothing to stop him. Fortunately, it looks like they're going to fall short, and I can't stop crying tears of sadness for them. Finally, just stop with this right. There's one more right in the Constitution that's worthy of discussing, and this is one that folks on the left really don't like to talk about, and that is your right to private property. You do have a right to private property in the Constitution. Your property cannot be removed from you without just compensation. What that meant, Richard Epstein has a very good book. He's a law professor at University of Chicago. He has a very good book on this in which he discusses the idea that when the government removes property from you, they have to give you something in return for it. So eminent domain, if they seize your building, they have to pay you for it. And if they seize your tax dollars, they have to give you services in return. Okay, they can't just take your tax dollars and then redistribute them for the sake of restoring income equality. That's not some power that the government was given. And the fact that the left thinks that the government has the power to come into your life, seize your money, depending on how much you make, and give it to somebody else is a violation of your individual rights. So these are all rights that you have. You need to ask yourself, whether you're right, left, or center, if these are rights that you care about, the right to hang out with people you want, the right to practice your religion, the right to do business with the people that you want to do business with, the right to earn a living without the government breathing down your neck, the right to have due process of law. If these are rights that you care about, ask who's threatening those rights. And then maybe you'd be better off, instead of protesting outside, thinking about protesting against the folks who had curbed those rights in the first place. Thanks so much. Happy to take your questions.